Hello, Facebook fam. Mnar Muhawesh here, founder and editor-in-chief of MintPress News. Thank you for joining me again today for another Monday discussion for some of the top stories at MintPress. Before we get started, I just want to give everybody a very quick update on our fundraising campaign and let everybody know that I am extremely, extremely thankful for all of the support that we have received at MintPress. We are almost halfway through. We're in our third week and we've already raised almost $9,000. Next week, I will be sharing some very important news, some good news about our campaign. We've secured a larger sponsor, and so I'm very confident that we're going to reach our goal. So I just want to thank everybody for supporting us, for their contributions, for their messages, for their love, for their support. Especially the personal messages that I've received on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook, just sharing their support for all of the work that we're doing, and the personal letters that I've received at MintPress. So thank you to all of you. So let's get started for today. I would like to talk about the very much celebrated bill that Bernie Sanders is trying to pass on Yemen. What he's trying to do is basically send a message that the United States is going to no longer be involved in the war in Yemen. And what has happened since this was voted on is that all over social media, this effort was celebrated as the end of US involvement in the war in Yemen. And if you guys have been following our coverage at MintPress News, the war in Yemen is a devastating, devastating war. It has created one of the worst, if not the worst, humanitarian crisis of the modern era. Over time, it has brought back a historic, something that hasn't even developed in the modern era, but cholera epidemic. 23 million people are at the brink of starvation. That could die of starvation by the end of this year. I mean, now it's December 3rd. And so it's estimated that 23 million Yemenis are expected to die by the end of this year. So we have like 27 days left. And now Bernie Sanders is trying to tell us that the United States now, after nearly 3 years of involvement in the war in Yemen, by selling Saudi Arabia billions of dollars worth of weapons to assist in the genocide of the Yemeni people, assisting Saudi Arabia with no accountability in its blockade, its illegal blockade of Yemen, not allowing any food or humanitarian assistance in. Now, 3 years later, while the country is literally on the brink of starvation, on the brink of death, the United States is about to end its involvement in Yemen. Well, I'm here to break it down for you guys. Is the United States really going to end its involvement in the war in Yemen? This effort was celebrated across social media. I mean, everybody that was tweeting about this, I mean, those tweets were going totally viral. And it was celebrated across many platforms and across many analysts speaking about it. But the truth is that there's a giant loophole in this bill that would actually allow the United States to continue pretty much all of its involvement in not just the war in Yemen when it comes to the Saudi war in Yemen, but basically use the excuse of any Al-Qaeda pocket in Yemen as a reason for the United States to continue its involvement in Yemen. Where have we heard that before? That's basically justification for like every war that we've seen after 9/11, the war on terror. The United States has been involved in Yemen long before the Saudis even launched an attack on Yemenis when the resistance movement rose up against the US and Saudi-backed government there. And so while I think many people appreciate Bernie Sanders' efforts, I think it's really important that we break down this bill. So I'm pulling it up here. It's on our website. It's written by Whitney Webb. She breaks down this effort. And so I'm just going to go over some of the key points here for those who don't feel like reading the whole article. But it's really important that we talk about this because it contains a major loophole that will basically allow the majority of US troops in Yemen to stay. So the co-authors of the bill were Bernie Sanders, Elizabeth Warren, who, by the way, both in recent years have, while they have softly, criticized Saudi Arabia's efforts in the Middle East, they have always, at the end of the day, have said the United States, when it comes to foreign policy in the Middle East, needs to support its allies in the Middle East and their efforts, including Saudi Arabia. And so we have to really be, critical of, their foreign policy, even though both of them, both Elizabeth Warren and Bernie Sanders, kind of try to come off as these pro-peace, anti-war candidates. I know Elizabeth Warren is said to be looking at running for president in the next coming election. Bernie Sanders tried to run for president, but at the very end, he said, you know what, guys, I'm just going to endorse Hillary Clinton, which was a big slap in the face for many people that were supporting him and the anti-war movement. So we really have to be critical of these efforts. One thing that the bill does not even touch on is the U.S. drone program in Yemen, which far exceeds the history of the Saudi Arabian war in Yemen and genocide in Yemen. And so when Bernie talked about ending U.S. involvement, it doesn't even come close to touching on the U.S. drone war in Yemen, where I believe 1 in 3 deaths in that drone war in Yemen are actually reported to be children. So it's a very devastating, very sad war that the United States has continued to shed so much of Yemeni blood for the sake of war profits. And then it doesn't even come close to even addressing the kill lists that were set up during the Obama administration. And so those are a couple of things that we wanted to talk about when breaking down the Bernie bill. And let's see here. So we're kind of towards the 3rd year of the war on Yemen, and it's really important that we continue to support coverage on what's taking place in Yemen. I believe a new report has showed that over 60,000 civilians have actually died. If you look at most mainstream media reports, the civilian death toll of the Saudi US-led war in Yemen has been basically left at about 10,000 civilians dead. But the reality is that local reports actually report that it's actually much higher, at a minimum 50,000 deaths from civilian deaths at the hands of the US-Saudi-led war in Yemen. In addition to that, we have to keep Yemen in our hearts, our minds, and our prayers, because what's happening there is literally the definition of genocide. Right now, Saudi Arabia, with the backing and the funding of the United States, they are targeting all of the food supply and agriculture supply of Yemen. They are making it impossible for people to eat, to have access to clean water. We have an upcoming report on how Saudi Arabia is targeting Yemen's lifeline, because Yemen is Yemen's mostly get their food from the sea. Then what do you call it? Excuse me. Most of their food is from the sea. So, we got a problem here. Technical glitch. Hold on 1 second, guys. I gotta fix this. Okay. All right, we got that fixed. So sorry about that. And so they're making it impossible for Yemenis to even eat and to live and to survive their everyday. And so we have to continue to support coverage on Yemen. We are providing that kind of coverage. And so if you haven't already, check out our coverage on our website to see more of what's happening in Yemen. And one of the reasons I wanted to talk about the Bernie Sanders bill is because, we have these kind of Fox Democrats that kind of come out and they try to paint themselves as these anti-war candidates, as these anti-war people representing us, and they really care about humanity. They care about ending and reducing our military footprint around the world. But then the very people that are trying to pass these bills, there's always these sort of loopholes that allow for continued military presence in countries like Yemen. the war in Yemen and US military involvement in Yemen, the drone war in Yemen, is a gravy train for profits for the military industrial complex. And so it really, really makes me wonder if Bernie Sanders had good intentions in trying to pass this bill, or if it was something more of a PR stunt to kind of separate Democratic and Republican support for what people are now calling Donald Trump's war in Yemen. No, this did not start with Donald Trump. It started a long time ago. In fact, Obama was named the drone king because of how many people, how many civilians he killed, he allowed to be killed by our drone program in Yemen. And so all of this surpasses every president. I mean, the war in Yemen, the US involvement in Yemen has basically been happening for a very, very long time, much far beyond what Saudi Arabia has been doing there. In fact, the southern part of Yemen is occupied by the United Arab Emirates, and the United States is on the ground with ground troops there. They've been there for a very, very long time. They have been training UAE troops there for, I would say, over 5 years. They're providing them with intelligence training and so forth to keep track of civilians in so-called Al-Qaeda pockets. They've even helped the UAE set up sexual torture sites so that they could use sexual torture as a means to get information from people there. And many of these people that are imprisoned in these sexual torture sites are obviously, and we've actually reported on them as being innocent. And so we really have to keep our eyes open on what's happening in Yemen. Why Yemen? Why is the United States involved in Yemen? Why such little coverage by the mainstream media about Yemen? And why all of a sudden this like selective outrage about what's happening in Yemen? I mean, MintPress has been covering the genocide that's been taking place in Yemen since 2015. And now after Jamal Khashoggi's death, the Saudi journalist that was basically chopped up into kebabs in a Saudi consulate, after his death, his horrific death, even though he did work for Saudi intelligence, all of a sudden we have journalists across the mainstream concerned about Saudi Arabia's human rights record. I mean, Saudi Arabia is known for literally beheading women, beheading activists, people who are, women who are trying to drive men and young people who are fighting for social justice, who are asking for basic rights. And now after this death of the Saudi journalist, who's an establishment journalist, who basically worked for the Saudi intelligence apparatus and was a spokesperson for them, who called for regime change across the Middle East in support of Saudi foreign policy, now the establishment is outraged. The selective outrage is pretty disturbing. And so I'm going to start taking comments here and questions. I wanted to keep today's live stream pretty short so that tomorrow we can continue the discussion, not about Yemen, but we're actually going to move on to Mark Lamont Hill and his firing from CNN. And we are actually going to track down who exactly is putting pressure on Temple University to get him fired, who worked tirelessly behind the scenes to get him fired as an analyst on CNN. I mean, we all kind of know that it's Israeli lobby groups and special interest groups, but we're actually going to name names. We're going to expose them and talk about how Palestine is basically a taboo issue still in the mainstream media. Israel is committing genocide. Another major US ally, Israel is committing genocide. It's the modern day apartheid colonialist state practicing ethnic cleansing and genocide. And they are one of the largest recipients of US aid. And we're not allowed to talk about it on the mainstream media. If you do, just like the brave Mark Lamont Hill did, then you will find yourself fired and pressured to apologize. And so we all need to stand with Mark. We need to send him our support. And so tomorrow, that's what the discussion is going to be about. But for today, let's continue talking about Bernie's bill. So I am receiving, I think I'm receiving messages here. So, okay, so we have something from John Gould. He's asking, with regard to that loophole, based on how it's written, let's see here. It points back to the authorization for use of military force that was written after 9/11 to go after those specifically responsible for 9/11, not the millions that have been slaughtered, wounded, displaced, tortured, rendition since the 9/11 wars started. The AUMF that legally justified all of the post 9/11 world national security state BS we have all hated. So I think that was more of a comment, not a question. And John Gold, that's exactly it. And that's why the use of Al-Qaeda is where that loophole is justifying US involvement in Yemen. And so what that means is that the United States can easily say, well, the resistance movement in Yemen are tied to Al-Qaeda. They can just put that label on them, just like they do and they've done in the past to any other group, to justify continued US support and involvement in US troops in the war in Yemen to support Saudi Arabia. And so that's how I believe the US will continue to support the Saudi war in Yemen. And so Jocelyn Nelson is asking, how likely will the bill pass? Obviously, I have no idea how likely the bill will pass. But I think based on the fact that there's this new outrage at Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen and their, human rights record, as I was just kind of describing to you all, it almost seems like, we have this kind of new narrative coming forth that we're going to save Yemen now. We're going to stop the United States from continuing its support in Yemen. Again, after 3 years of basically being a part of this major genocide there. And so this is a very similar tactic that we've used in many wars. We go in, we destroy a city, we destroy a country, we ravage it, we massacre it, but then we always somehow come out at the very end like these heroes, like, well, we stopped it, we ended it before it could have gotten really, really bad. And so I think that with this new report that MintPress News has been pushing out, that 23 million Yemenis are on the brink of death because of starvation. This is now starting to be reported on by the mainstream media because of our MintPress News. So now this, we've kind of put that fire underneath the establishment's feet to start caring about Yemen, not that they actually care about Yemen, but so that they can actually take action about Yemen. I think that we are going to come out as these heroes in some sort, that, we made this, moral decision to just, not support Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen. And again, we're painting it as Saudi Arabia's war in Yemen, even though Saudi Arabia is a proxy ally of the United States, and all of Saudi Arabia's wars are America's wars. And so let's see here. So I have a question here, somewhat related, but it's going to be the last question that I'm going to take, so we can keep today's live stream kind of short. But this is from Kevin Brongo, and he's asking, what are your thoughts on Rand Paul trying to withhold $35 billion to Israel? I think that is a very, very brave move. I think it's a great move that Rand Paul is doing. I think he should have done this a long time ago if he didn't already. And so this is one of those moments where we should once again stand by Rand Paul and his efforts to withhold the $35 billion to Israel. This is one of the largest military aid packages that we have given Israel in U.S. history. The aid package under Obama was the biggest aid package in U.S. history, and now this package is the biggest aid package in U.S. history. It just keeps going up, 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 up. I mean, we have Detroit literally drinking lead water. Many of our streets here are broken down. Children don't have access to clean water in our own country here. And we are giving billions of dollars to an apartheid state, an apartheid regime committing genocide and ethnic cleansing against native Palestinians. And so what's going to happen next is what happened to Mark Lemont Hill, which is, I have a very strong feeling that a major smear campaign is going to get hold of Rand Paul. I believe there's an article right now written by If Americans Knew. It's Allison Weir's website. They have extensive coverage on some of the most prominent neocons and pro-Israel and Zionist lobby groups that are now going after Rand Paul for trying to withhold Israel of their military aid package. So I would watch out for that article. I believe we reposted it on our website because it's such an important and detailed report on who these groups are. And so if everybody can visit our website, you should be able to find more information on that. And so if there are any more questions, I'm going to check one more time. There are more. Let's see here. Someone said, why do you always blame Israel and the United States? And I find that to be a really, really interesting question because we have the United States as basically the largest empire, military empire the world has ever seen. I believe it's like over, I think it's a few thousand military bases around the world. Our economy is driven by war, the blood of innocent civilians around the world. That's what our economy is driven by. Every single war that we're seeing, and especially the war on terror, which most wars are tied to that, have become a gravy train for profits for the military industrial complex, which is running our economy. And so when someone asks me, why do I think that the United States military and war, lust for war is the reason for much of the suffering around the world, is because that's what's going on. The United States military is supporting proxy wars, supporting arms trades that are funding civil wars in Africa, in South America, in the Middle East, and across the world. We're propping up dictatorships and right-wing governments that are oppressing women, that are oppressing minorities, that are spreading, a very racist and anti-Semitism. They're spreading Islamophobia. They're basically against anybody who is brown, and they support the dehumanization of the people that we oppress and kill in our wars. And then we have countries like Israel, which is an ethno-nationalist, white nationalist state. It's an apartheid state. It was founded as a proxy state by our country, by the British government. And they are basically not just oppressing Palestinians and stealing their land, but they are acting as a proxy front for the United States and the military industrial complex. I mean, Israel is now one of the top arms dealers around the world. They're selling their weapons, just like the United States does, to brutal dictatorships and regimes across Africa. They're fueling unrest and civil wars across Africa and in the Middle East and in South America, just like the military industrial complex wants, because as long as we the people are divided and fighting each other and killing each other and hating each other based on the color of our skin or the clothes that we have on our bodies, then they can continue to exploit us. They can continue to make enormous profits off of the bloodshed while we keep ourselves distracted through this hate. And I know that the person who left that comment has a lot of hate in their heart because they just cannot fathom that that these governments are doing such horrific things. It's easier to say the people who rule over us care about us and are taking care of us than to say that these people around us are our neighbors and we should love them and support them, because that's really what we should be saying, and not trusting our government-led officials to lead us, because those are the ones who are there to exploit us. So I hope that answers your question. I believe, I don't know, I forgot who left that comment, but I was going to say thank you to that person. Okay, so let's see here. We have, all right, so I was going to take one more question. I keep saying I'm going to take one more question, but a lot of good questions here. Ramzi Yafei, I think his name is. Do you think the coalition will send more Al-Qaeda or ISIS terrorists to Yemen? Last year, Saudis brought them to Aden from Syria and Iraq. I was actually going to say the same thing. Last year, Saudi Arabia totally brought the Islamic State into Yemen. And I actually believe that much of Al-Qaeda that exists in Yemen today was brought there. Yemen has a very, today when we think of Yemen, we think of like a war-ravaged country that is like starving. And that's really the image of Yemen that we know of today. But in reality, Yemen's history is very rich. Yemen is one of the richest countries in the Middle East. While it's today the poorest country because of war, throughout history, Yemen has actually been known to be one of the richest countries in the Middle East in terms of its minerals, its resources, and its history. And so there's a reason why the world powers are there to exploit Yemen. It's a beautiful, beautiful country that has so much to offer the world. And that's why they believe that it needs to be controlled. And so whenever we want to control a country, we bring in terrorism, we bring in right-wing groups, we bring in Nazis, whatever it may be. And in Yemen, the Middle East, they just like to bring in these right-wing Al-Qaeda groups who follow the doctrines of Wahhabism and Salafism, which is a political movement driven by and basically created to, by the British Empire to divide and exploit the Muslim world. And so that's what happened throughout history in Yemen. Yemen has been a target for exploitation. And that's why I believe that Al-Qaeda was initially brought into Yemen. And last year, ISIS was brought into there. So yes, I definitely agree with you, Ramzi. I think that will continue. And in fact, I think, as I mentioned before, the coalition might even end up labeling the resistance movement as Al-Qaeda just because, because most people don't understand the conflict in Yemen. They'll just label them as Al-Qaeda to give more reason for the United States to continue to be involved in Yemen. And so, wow, we just went over $9,000 on our fundraising campaign. Thank you guys. We're halfway there. And so thank you guys so much for your support. I'm going to say thank you to Philip Magart for helping us get over 9,000. Thank you so much, Philip. Okay, so last question. I promise this is the last question I'm going to take. Do you think the military-industrial complex will start war with Iran next, or maybe to get Trump re-elected? This is a really, really tricky question because the United States has basically been threatening war with Iran for over 40 years. And Iran has been preparing for that war for over 40 years. And so Iran is a really tricky place. It's not Iraq. It's not Syria. It's not Yemen. What's really interesting in Iran is that the people there are more united than in the majority of the countries that the United States has gone to war with. Iran has done a really, really, good job at uniting its people and actually preparing them for the war on like a ground troop level, kind of like our National Guard, except their National Guard is like this. It's enormous. And so I don't think that going to Iran is very easy. And that's why we've been threatening it as like this intimidation tactic for over 40 years, but we haven't actually done it. Although we are surrounding Iran. Iran is also about 3 times the size of Iraq in terms of geography and in terms of people as well. And so it's really not that easy to go to war with Iran. However, having said that, I have never seen an administration so hawkish towards Iran than I have the Trump administration. But then again, we've seen other administrations threaten other things with Iran and nothing has come out of it. We've attacked Iran where it hurts. We've tried to weaken Iran through Syria, tried to weaken Iran through Iraq, and so forth. And now, and obviously through sanctions and trying to warm up with Russia, maybe warm up with China, whatever it may be, and try to, hurt Iran with its allies economically. Iran is on its way to becoming a major superpower in the world arena. While the United States and our media demonize Iran and kind of dehumanize Iran, something that the media won't ever tell us is how much of an economic powerhouse Iran is. And that's why it's such a threat to the global powers that be. They don't want another economic world power to come on the international scene to show its might. But the only difference is that Iran has never really threatened to go to war with any other country. Their tactics have always been through diplomacy. And so will the United States go to war with Iran? I really, really don't know. It's kind of one of those things where you just, who knows? With Trump, like, so many surprises, right? So I guess we'll have to wait and see. And so, okay, so that was going to be the last question, but I think this one is really, really important. Terry Emerson is asking, how can we help the people of Yemen? Is there an organization we can trust to help them? I'm going to tell you guys right now that the Women's March on the Pentagon is a really, really great resource in understanding organizations and finding organizations that you can donate to help Yemen. I know that they are holding a fast for Yemen, and if you sponsor people who fast, for the people of Yemen to stand in solidarity with the people that are starving there, whatever money they collect is not going to go to them. It's going to go straight to Yemen. And I believe on their website, they have a few organizations mentioned there. I plan on donating to sponsor some of these people that are fasting. I think you guys should too. I know our editorial assistant, Emma Fiala, she is my inspiration. She is fasting. I can't fast, unfortunately. I am nursing full-time. So I can't fast. So she's fasting. We should support her. We should support other people who are fasting for Yemen. And if you do that, you can send them money, and they're collecting the money. It's all public information. It's like, they're not going to take the money for themselves. They're collecting the money so that they can send it to Yemen and organizations that we can trust, and you can find that information on the website. So that's a wrap up. I said I was going to talk for 15 minutes. It has now been about 35. So we want to wrap it up. I thank you guys for joining me today. Tomorrow, I'm going to come back and do another live discussion on Mark Lamont Hill, and we're going to break down the groups that are actually the ones that have been pressuring CNN and Temple University to fire him and to let go of him, and also the Israeli lobby groups and the people, the neocons, who are working behind the scenes, who have pressured him to apologize. I don't think Mark Lamont Hill had to apologize, but he did. But he still stands by all of his words in support of Palestine and justice for all people. And so make sure that before tomorrow, you do send him his support. He is feeling the heat from these groups. They are trying to make an example of him, and we need to stand next to him and support him. So thank you guys for joining me today. Mnar Muhawesh here, founder of MintPress News, and we'll catch up with you soon. Bye, guys.